Okay. In 1947, my folks moved from Lakeview to Baldwin. We lived on Edward Street. Edward Street goes from Grand Avenue to Woodside Avenue, and we lived about 3 houses from the corner. We were not the first, this was not a new development. The house was probably built in 1936 or 1942. We moved in 1947. I was 3 years old, my older brother was 5, and my little brother was born in that house. In those days, I remember early on while we lived there, they started digging up the streets to put sewers in, which was great because there were mounds of dirt. And in those days, before Game Boy and all those games, we used to play in the dirt. We had little cars and trucks that we'd move around and build tunnels and things like that. It was a nice neighborhood, kids my age, and I attended Schubert School, which was 2 blocks away. So I used to walk to school every day. What else do I remember? I remember playing in the neighborhood. We had a big weeping willow tree in the backyard, and we used to climb up that tree, and that was our fun, playing with the trees, building little houses out of cardboard boxes that washers and dryers come in. We used to cut holes for windows and decorate them and have a hell of a good time. Nowadays, my official residence is down in Florida, a place called Boynton Beach. We're in a villa, which is 2 houses connected side to side to one another. It's a gated community, and of course there's golf and tennis and swimming and all those activities. I'm what you would call a snowbird. I spend 6 months up here in the New York area and 6 months down there. Because that's my official residence, I must spend at least 6 months and 1 day down there in order for tax purposes to take advantage of the homestead exemption, which gives me a break on my taxes. Up here in New York, I live about 10 blocks from Mr. Lease in Long Beach, where if you're familiar with Long Beach, I'm on Olive Street, right near Edwards, and about 6 houses from the beach. We rent our home up here, and we have the ground floor, the whole ground floor of a big old house that was built in 1911. So it's kind of quaint. It's got a lot of character. A big fireplace, high ceilings, humongous dining room, but itty-bitty kitchen. And only 3 closets in the whole house, okay? 2 of them are as you come in the front door, they're the entryway closets, and there's 1 in the master bedroom. So closet space is a problem. Stories growing up. Now it depends on what age you're talking about. As a youngster, one of the things we rode our bicycles an awful lot. And one of the things we used to do in those days to prevent insects and bugs we used to have a truck go up and down the streets spraying DDT, a chemical that kills the bugs. Okay, and this truck would go up and down the streets with a big plume of smoke. The DDT was sent out in a big cloud of smoke. And of course, us kids, not knowing any better, we used to ride our bicycles right behind that truck, up and down the streets. So if I'm losing my memory, it's probably because of the DDT that we inhaled going up and down those streets. After I graduated from, in Baldwin High School, Oh, let me go back. The neighborhood we grew um, up in North Baldwin, you know where McDonald's is up there?
Yeah.
Well, of course, McDonald's wasn't there. About where McDonald's is, Terra Nova Florist was there, Terra Nova Nursery. And everything behind there, going all the way to the Southern State Parkway, all the way from Grand Avenue to Woodside Avenue, was a forest. Nothing but woods. And we used to play in the woods, and we'd get lost in the woods, and we'd chase rabbits around. As a matter of fact, we caught a rabbit, brought it home, and mated it with a friend's rabbit, and we had two little tiny rabbits living in our basement for a couple of years. We built a rabbit hutch out back. We used to feed the rabbits, and one of the rabbits was, now, I was about 6 years old then, maybe 7 years old. One of the rabbits was born with only one ear. I think we called him Oscar. And the other one was another cute black rabbit we called Black Beauty, my favorite. In the summer, the spring, the fall, the rabbits would live in the rabbit hutch out back, and in the winter, we'd bring them inside. And of course, one of us kids would have to clean up after the rabbits, feed them. In that woods, there is a street, I think, called Clyde Road. There was a little ball field cut out of the woods. And so this was back in 1952, 1953, or even before that, before they had organized sports in the town, okay? In high school, they had organized sports, but for little kids, they didn't. And I remember when the fire department started a little, almost like Little League, a little baseball program for kids. And I remember going down there and trying out for the team. Of course, there were probably 40, 50, 60 kids trying out for the team or the teams, but they only had room for maybe a couple of dozen. And I wasn't good enough to make the team. But we still played in the woods around that field and had a hell of a lot of fun. After I graduated from high school and I went away to the Naval Academy, my folks still lived in Baldwin here, and one summer, just to fill the time because many of my friends had moved away, I got a job in the summer filling in for taxi drivers who were taking vacation. I worked down at Dawson Taxi. I think that's still in town here. And I didn't know what I was doing. They said I needed to get my chauffeur's license, which I got. I thought I was a good driver. I grew up in the town, so I knew virtually every road in Baldwin. And on my very first day of driving and my very first fare, I was called down to 109 Centennial Avenue. Again, this is my first time driving a cab. I pull up in front of the house, and I park there, and I'm waiting for my fare to come out of the house. 1 minute passes, 2 minutes passes, nobody comes out, so I go up to the front door and I knock. The door opens. A college-age gal answers the door, and the first thing she says to me is, "Why didn't you honk?" Well, I guess I didn't go through taxi school. I didn't know whether to honk or not. So she finally comes, and I drive her to the station, to the railroad station, to pick up her father's car, and she went to her summer job, which was at Chase Cleaners in Freeport, dry cleaning. She hated the job. Too hot in there. I don't know whether I should go on with the story, but eventually, this is the gal I married. Well, it's a long, complicated story, but let me just say that I picked her up that first day, which is a Monday, I picked her up on Tuesday and Wednesday. Thursday, no call. So I kind of missed her, although I didn't even know her name. So Friday, again, no call. So like a foolish, 19, 20-year-old, I wanted to get in touch with her. And so I looked up in the telephone directory. In those days, you could look up. I knew her last name and I knew her address. So, hey, there was her telephone number. And I call up and I say, I'm the fellow who drove you in a taxi Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. She says, yeah, well, why are you calling? I said, well, I thought maybe you'd like to go out. She says, where? And I said, well, my older brother, his girlfriend is appearing in a play at the Adelphi Little Theater. I thought you'd like to go to that. She says, when is it? I said, tomorrow night. I'll pick you up at 7:30 if that's okay. She says, okay. And it was a short conversation. I still didn't know her name. So the next day I go to Dawson Taxi. It's Saturday morning. Go to Dawson Taxi at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I say, hey, you'll never guess who I have a date with. They said, who? I said, 109 Centennial Avenue. They said, that's impossible. I thought, how could it be impossible? Maybe it's against the policy to date your clients, So they said, oh, no. Didn't you see? She's engaged. She has a big ring on her finger. And I said, well, I didn't notice that. I always looked at her through the rearview mirror or over my shoulder. And guys never look for rings, Sure enough, she was engaged. So it was a platonic relationship. We'd go to the beach. She was engaged to a fellow who was in the Navy as an enlisted man serving overseas in Japan. And before he shipped out to Japan, he gave her the ring so that she would write to him and keep in touch, okay? Her mom didn't care for this fellow too much, which was good for me. So anyway, we would see each other kind of as companions. And when it was time for me to go back down to the Naval Academy, well, it's a long story, but anyway, I invited her down a couple of times. I invited her to the Army-Navy game. I invited her to June Week. I invited her to a bunch of things. And, that fall, after the summer, I noticed she wasn't wearing the ring anymore, okay? She had given it back to him. So anyway, we dated occasionally. I invited her to June Week. She came. June Week at the U.S. Naval Academy is the week before graduation, or the week before you're commissioned. And I was commissioned as an ensign in the Navy. And I picked my ship. I picked my ship so it would be close to home, up in Newport, Rhode Island, a destroyer. And I was going to be the anti-submarine warfare officer. So anyway, I'll try to make this story fast. Before I went to my first duty station, on my first assignment, I had a week off. So Mary Ellen, I found out her name, Mary Ellen and I would go to the beach and we'd have fun. And when it was the last day, the next morning I was going to take off and drive down to Norfolk, Virginia. All of a sudden she gets in a snit. She slams the door to my car and says, have a nice life. I said, well, these crazy women, you don't know what's going on. So I go down to Norfolk, Virginia, to 3 weeks of nuclear weapon warhead school. After that, I drive down to Key West, 12 weeks of ASW officer school. And while I'm down in Key West, a song comes on the radio, a song you probably have heard by the association called Never My Love. And it reminded me of Mary Ellen. I don't know why, because since she slammed the door to my car and said, have a nice life, I hadn't been in touch with her at all. But anyway, because the song reminded me of her. I called her on the phone, and she says, "Why are you calling me?" The first thing she says, "Did you get my letter?" I'm not into keeping track of every letter I received. I corresponded with a couple of young ladies, and so I said yes. She says, "What did you think?" I said, "Well, I always enjoy getting your letters. I didn't remember. I didn't know whether it was a card or a little note or a letter." So she says, "Why are you calling me?" I said, "Well, in 2 weeks, I'll be leaving Key West, driving up to meet my ship in Newport, Rhode Island, virtually passing your house. I wonder if I could stop by and say hi." She says, "Okay." Well, anyway, that happened. I stopped by, said hi. She had mononucleosis at the time. So I go up to my ship. We dated a couple of times. Now, this whole time, I met her when she was engaged. Most of the time, we dated somewhat seriously. She'd come down to the Naval Academy, or I'd be up in New York on a weekend. We probably hadn't seen each other or been together more than 50 hours or something like that. But around Christmas time, I asked her to marry me. Aww. And she said yes. And the timing was inappropriate because in a month, my ship was going out to sea for 5.5 months. We're going over to Europe, to the Mediterranean, up to Scandinavia, and along the coast of Norway. At any rate, when the ship came home, 2 weeks later we were married. We went on a little honeymoon. I brought her up to Newport, Rhode Island. She was my Navy wife. And we're living up there in Navy housing. 3 years later, the postman comes to the door, leaves a letter addressed to me, and it's about this big. It's in a blue envelope, and I opened it up. It's 4 pages long, and I notice on the postmark that it was sent to Nuclear Weapon Warhead School in Norfolk, Virginia. It was then forwarded to Key West. It was then forwarded to Fleet Post Office, New York, New York, and it took 3 years to catch up with me, and it was a Dear John letter that she wrote me after she slammed the door of my car and said, "Have a nice life, give me every reason in the world." She'd never want to see me again. Okay. We are married 49 years now, okay, which is a kind of interesting story. But anyway, that started in Baldwin at with the driving the Dawson taxi.
You said you only spent. Was it like
Well, you know what?
Because they say that
When,
men.
when you're down at the Naval Academy, you don't have much time off. I was, a plebe year. You're only off for 5 hours on Saturday afternoon. As you get up to become a youngster, which is a sophomore or a junior or a senior, first classman, you have more time off, but it's only on the weekends or on the few weekends that you can put in for leaving for a weekend. Back in those days, maybe it was 3 times a semester that you could actually drive home. You'd leave at 5 o'clock after classes. You get home at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. You'd have Saturday, and then you'd have to leave probably 6 o'clock Sunday to drive all the way back to Annapolis, Maryland, and be there before they closed the gates. Okay, and if they closed the gates, you had to climb over the wall and sneak into the dormitory. Well, it was a nice place to grow up, and Baldwin High School had a very, very good reputation. Okay, without Baldwin High School, I would have been able to go to the Naval Academy because people hear about Baldwin. They had a great program, great activities. What has, you know what? I think the neighborhood quality, the local neighborhood schools are the same. I think the churches are the same. And I don't think that has changed much, even though there's been a lot of new homes built down in Baldwin Harbor and up in up north. What has changed? It has gotten less rural. When we moved here in 1947, Baldwin High School was not here, of course, okay? Nor was the shopping center on Grand Avenue. This whole property from Grand Avenue back to Brookside, from Stanton Avenue to Ethel Kloberg Drive, was a golf course. The house my folks moved into, not this, the second home, was built by RCA, Radio Corporation of America. That was like CBS or what have you back then, as a summer retreat back in 1920 something, okay? And so Baldwin was really the country. Of course, that all changed. After Shupert School, I went to Baldwin High School, or junior high school, which was up behind the firehouse across from the library. It's now condominiums and townhouses and what have you. But I think it was in 1957 that Baldwin High School was built. My older brother was the first class to go all the way through freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and graduate from Baldwin High School. I remember talking about junior high school, I used to take the bus up to junior high school. One of the things that happened, I remember when we got there, I guess it was about 1957, I was in science class, and they had the television on because the Russians had just sent off the Sputnik, okay? And oh wow, this was amazing because they were now ahead of the United States technology-wise. We had to catch up. And of course, science, the science program, the technology program nowadays was scampering around to try to catch up with the Russians, and there was a big push. I remember coming home on the bus one day. I had an argument with a friend a classmate I hardly even knew. His name was Floyd Rosenfeld, and I don't even remember the nature of the argument. But boy, we got out of the bus. This must have been up on Grand Terrace, up in North Baldwin. We got out of the bus, and we go at it, and we're wrestling and punching one another on somebody's front lawn. And I think he was about my size, a little heavier than I was at the time, but somehow I managed to in a wrestling position, get on top of him and fend him off a little bit. The bus didn't move. The bus driver saw us, wrestling and fighting on the ground, and everybody in the bus was leaning out the windows cheering for one or the other, I forget which. And the fight ended. Nobody was seriously injured. Floyd Rosenfeld became my best friend all through high school, and it was amazing that I'm not even sure I knew his name before that fight. One of the things that Baldwin was famous for was Nunley's Carousel. I don't know if you ever heard of Nunley's. Up on Grand Avenue between, I guess it was just east of Milburn. I'm trying to remember what's there now. They had a auto parts place and things like that. there was, Nunley's had this big carousel, which I think was the only one on Long Island, or at least on the South Shore of Long Island, and it attracted people from all over, even from the city.